I just think you learn, especially when you get older, that, life requires grace. Relationships require grace. And you require grace to you should be required to give grace to yourself. Because there's times when I make drawings and make things that I don't love. And I have to be able to tell myself, it's okay. You're still, learning. That never ends.
Hello, print friends, and welcome. I'm your host, Miranda Metcalf. Each week, I chat with artists who use print-based media to do something beyond the expected. This is a bilingual podcast, so if you subscribe to us, you'll be getting episodes in English with me, as well as in Spanish with Ronaldo Gil-Zambrano. Together, we speak to printmakers around the globe about their practice and passions in the world of printmaking. Hello Print Friend is brought to you by Speedball Art Products, who've been a leading innovator and manufacturer of printing products for over 50 years. Speedball's speed screens answer the call to have an easy-to-use way to screen print, no matter your experience level. Whether printing at home, studio, or classroom, these ready-to-use mesh screens allow you to create permanent photographic stencils without the need to mix emulsions or coat a screen. All you need is your design and you're ready to print. Pick up the Speed Screens kit for the most affordable way to get all the materials necessary to print your next masterpiece. There's a link in the show notes. My guest this week is Rashuan Rucker. We talk about his early childhood influences, watching wrestling with his grandparents, and making championship belts for the whole neighborhood, discovering the iconography of pigeons while walking down the sidewalk, his love of educating viewers about his work, and making artwork that is now sitting in the Smithsonian from the sofa in his living room. So, without further ado, sit back, relax, and prepare to spread your wings with Rashuan Rucker. Hi, Rashaun. How's it going?
Hi, Miranda. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you for making some time to chat with me in your busy day, working artist, full-time dad, all of that. I've really had you on my wish list to talk to for quite some time, so I'm really excited for our chat.
Oh, I'm honored to be here.
Yeah. So before we dive into the questions I got for you and start chatting about your practice and your life, would you mind introducing yourself and just letting people know who you are, where you are, and what you do?
I'm Rashuan Rucker. I guess I would consider myself a mid-career artist. I'm in my 40s, and I'm a printmaker, a photographer, and a draftsman, and I'm in Detroit, and that's kind of what my life is.
Mm-hmm. And where did you grow up, and what role did art play in that part of your life?
I grew up in North Carolina. I grew up in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. And I don't know, I think I was blessed to be one of those people that kind of found art early in life and realized that it was my passion. And I think that was always my avenue to kind of see the world. I knew from an early age, I want to go to college. I want to get out of the neighborhood. And, by the time I was 5 or 6 and I was drawing a lot and doing, just my own little artwork, it was like, okay, this is going to be my, my avenue to explore, and traverse the country like I want to.
Yeah. And so like from really early on, you were kind of seeing, I've had a lot of guests talk about like how they got a lot of positive attention from having art skills as a young kid and kind of realizing that was a way to be someone sort of special in the world or kind of to be recognized. Did you have that, supportive, like the kids at school liking what you do and folks liking what you do kind of young experience?
It's funny that you say that because I don't think anybody's ever asked me that, but that's one of those things where I think that's the first thing that like kind of separates you from other kids, and I remember being in school and they were like, man, you should see Rashaun, he can really draw Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles,
Yeah.
Like Voltron, He-Man, you're drawing stuff that's like of that time. And, and then kids, I started having kids pay me like $1 or $2 to like draw, G.I. Joes and little stuff like that. And then you start realizing like, I don't necessarily know what I have, but I know I have something that's like special because I know there's some other kids who might be great at sports or music or other things, but like, this is my thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
kind of figure that out. Just, it's weird. Like the world will the universe will just show it to you in that way.
Totally. And I love that you were already a young artist entrepreneur, getting the lunch money, right? Because
Candy.
Totally. I remember that. I couldn't draw as a kid, but I remember there was a kid in the class who was the kid who could draw. And sure enough, he's making his living making beautiful murals now. Around Washington State, and it was like there'd be like a little line at his desk at lunchtime, to be like, draw me a bunny, whatever they needed. So yeah, you're one of the art kids, it sounds like. Yeah,
definitely.
Mm-hmm. And you also talk about like actually wrestling being kind of a part of your early influence and part of your young artistic development. Can you talk about that?
Huge part of my development. It's so funny when I talk about it because I think people are like, wow, what a weird entree. And it really was. I mean, I grew up in this house that was like this extended family. And I think a lot of people in the South and other places back then in the 70s grew up in these houses where there was like, your aunt and uncle and mom and grandma. Everybody's in just one house.
Yeah.
And so it was me and a cousin of mine, my mom and her sister and their parents. It's just my grandparents were, they were like, it was their house and they were like the ruler over the house. One of the things that they always loved to do was watch wrestling. And back then, it wasn't like now, like there's literally a TV in every room in my house that you turn to.
Uh-huh.
Like 2 TVs in the house. There was like one in the living room, like the floor model. And there was like one in my grandparents' room. And you kind of had to watch what they were watching.
Right.
And they would watch wrestling and I just loved it. And, and as a kid, you're always thinking about how this will translate to your world as a child. And so many cartoons that I love and TV shows, they were birthed more by toys. And so with wrestling, I was like, there's no way to play it, other than physically wrestle at home or whatever. There's no way to be like, there's no toy to have. And so I started asking my mom who had like, my mom had some pretty decent drawing skills at her like young age. And she would draw Ric Flair and Dusty Rhodes and Hulk Hogan and all these different wrestlers on paper and color them. And then I think one day she just kind of got fed up with it because I cut them out and make these little paper dolls. And she was like, dude, you got to learn how to do it yourself. Like wrestlers all the time. And so that kind of led me to doing it and like really trying to hone in on my drawing skills by drawing these wrestlers, which later turned in, to me making cardboard belts for the neighborhood. Like I would make cardboard wrestling belts and I would super glue tin foil on them like it was the metal, and then take a permanent marker and draw all the eagles and designs on them and, put little slits in them so you can actually wear them. We would go up and down the street wrestling for these belts.
Amazing. Do any of the belts still exist? I feel like they should be in the Rashuan Rucker archive,
I think about making them sometimes now, but I'm like, man, they make real belts for little kids.
Right.
Like, but that was before. I mean, somebody who was in merchandising had the foresight to see that, all kids want to hold up a little belt.
Yeah.
And I used to get in trouble for it because I would use my grandmother's aluminum foil, and she was like, stop using my good foil to make belts for kids.
Yeah, foil's like pricey. Yeah.
Foil's expensive, and I don't even remember where I got the permanent markers from, but I had like the red, the blue, and the black, and that's the only thing that would really make a mark on foil.
Mm-hmm.
And I think my grandfather might have got them for me, and it was just, then I get paid here and there for some belts. It was just kind of my love for wrestling, and I guess wrestling itself is creative. It's scripted.
Oh yeah,
and it's an art to it in itself, and so that physical art became, it manifests my visual art.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think just, having that experience as a young person to say, I want this thing to exist in the world and I'm going to find a way to manifest it, to create it, I think really is the seeds of what it is to be a grown-up human professional artist, is just having the vision and then trying to find how you get there.
I love that you said that because I just was telling somebody the other day, I said, I think people like artists because there's a little bit of magic to what we do. Mm-hmm. It's something where there's nothing and turn it into something. How many people can sit in front of a blank piece of paper and turn it into something and like something, with some magic in it. And I think that's why I'm always like super grateful and like humble to even have this gift, because I'm like, it's a little bit of magic that's out there in the world and we need, all the magic we can get these days.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you're totally right. And that's, particularly when people are not connected in any way to the arts, which is so common. I've worked at commercial art galleries for 10 years, and you tend to really be the face, like the face where you're really interacting with the public about art, in a way that is really immediate, maybe the most immediate out of all the kind of different elements that people have. Because you go into an art museum, there's not someone sitting behind a desk saying, do you have any questions, right? And so it's talking with people as often as I do who don't have the background in art and who don't have any training in it. They'll look at a painting and you can just tell they're just mystified by the process that went into it, depending on the painting, right? They're the minimalist ones where you do get the my son could have done that, kind of talk. But for a lot of the art that we show, it really is. I love the word for it is perfect. It's a kind of magic, I think. And if you're not used to thinking about the world and like creating objects in it, like new beautiful objects, it seems really like a wizard did it, I think.
Without people like you and artists like me, I don't necessarily know where we would be at, because we are on those front lines of what I call education. It's like you're constantly educating people about art and, why it has value. And one of the big things that I'm always, speaking about or trying, to make part of my practice continually is the education of people about the value of art, and especially in communities of color. And I'm always about access. Any gallery I work with will tell you that I'm the guy that they probably don't like necessarily because, I know where the market price is for my work, but I'm always the person that's going to make small work because I want the guy who drives the bus or the woman who's a social worker to be able to buy it.
Yeah.
Everybody should have access to art on some level. And so that's why I tend to make a lot of studies, because I'm like, I want these to get, to be accessed by people who might not be able to buy a large piece of work. Because I think back to my childhood, I didn't really have access to art other than making it myself to an art museum. So I think I might have been in college. Like there was none around me. There was no art museum to go to. Well, that's very important for me to give people access. And, you can't really be what you can't see. And I always think about that little kid that was like me. I'm like, well, now that little kid can see me and other people. And so I'm always like, even like a lot of the young kids, I give drawings to or prints to, because I'm like, you can do this. I'm not doing anything that you can't inspire to be.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. And having worked in a gallery, I'm definitely not one of the gallerists who mind at all when my artists say, like, I want to make some smaller works, or I want to go do an edition of prints, with Landfall Press, which is, who we have here in Santa Fe, or Black Rock Editions, which is what sort of the newest evolution of Landfall. Because it's so exciting to me to be able to connect people with art when they think it's not for them. And I think that's one of like the really, really disservices that popular culture has done to contemporary fine art, is when you see art on television or in movies, it's astronomical prices, it's millionaires, it's like unfriendly gallerists, it's this really like heavy sense of elitism. And it really bums me out, because I want, as you said, like bus drivers, social workers, like anyone to feel like this is for me by virtue of the fact that I'm a human being in the world. I get to have art in my life. Yeah.
Art is for you simply because you exist. And, I think that's one of my major, like, I guess something that grinds my gears about the art world is that I think we've been conditioned over time to look at it as a very elitist, persnickety type of thing, where people have, their nose in the air, and it's, you can't approach it. I was talking to someone, and they were like telling me how like they wanted to get something and they couldn't get access to it. And I was like, well, are you trying to get access to it because you think it's going to make, whatever your collection is more valuable? Or are you trying to get access to it because you love it? I tell people all the time, like, buy what you love. Don't chase the great white whale. Like, I was appealing to you, because I always tell people that, like, I want to buy what I love. I want to buy in the sense of I'm never going to flip it or sell it. I just want to buy something. I'm like, no matter what happens, I know I can live with this forever because I feel that much joy when I see it. And, you know, I just think that we've turned it into, like you said, this very elitist thing. And, you know, you got to be on the scene, because people sometimes in Detroit will say, man, I don't see you out. You're not on the scene. And I'm like, what? I'm like, what scene are you talking about? I'm like, I ain't on the scene because I'm making work. Mm-hmm. I'm doing what I love. Like, I tell people all the time, like, when you see my work in a gallery, that's for you. It's not for me. My joy is in the making. I'm a maker. Like, what you see on the wall is for you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I just had like 3 different thoughts about what you were saying, like that got like all stuck at the same time trying to come out. But yeah, I love that. And I feel like people can't hear enough by what you love, because I'm at a gallery right now where we represent, a lot of museum collected artists. And so we have a lot of conversations about like, well, if I get this, like, tell me like major acquisitions that are on the horizon that's going to raise its value. And I just want to say, just if you love it, if you truly love it with all of your being, you could be told next week it's worth the paper it's printed on, and it will change nothing for you. And that's the joy of having art in your life, is what can't be taken away, is that you connect with it. Or I find that like I buy work that reminds me of something I love about myself. Like I see it and it affirms for me, like, oh yeah, like I'm the kind of person who likes a really weird Paul Wunderlich lithograph. Like I like that about myself, and I see it and it makes me feel good, and I find it really beautiful. And that lithograph could be worth $0 tomorrow, and I would still be happy every time I see it. And you can't take that away. Yeah.
I think whatever you're kind of buying should be totally representational of who you are as a person. I mean, sometimes I look around my house, the art I have, and I'm like, man, it's all printmaking and drawing. But guess what? That's what I love. I'm like, I'm going to always like gravitate towards that, because I'm like, I love mark making, and that's what I want to see. Mm-hmm. So that's what I buy. And, you know, the biggest thing that like always like makes me cringe is when I'm at my framer sometime. Like, he has a booming frame business. So I come in there, we've been working together for 20 years. I just kind of step back every time another customer comes in, because I'm like, I can be here all day. Like, we got to really work through. He might be framing an entire show.
Right.
Sometimes I'm just like standing off to the side and I'm listening to people, and they're like trying to match art to a couch.
Yeah.
Oh my God, I want to just run over there and be like, do not buy this because you have a red couch. Like, buy this because you love it. You know, don't frame things like. None of the frames match anything in my house. None of the art matches anything. It's just like salon style. I'm like, I love it, you know. But when I hear that, I'm like, you know, because it just reminds me of, you know, even people in my family and growing up, people are like, well, I'm like, nothing has to match. Mm-hmm. Like, we've been conditioned that it has to match. It don't have to match. Yeah. All you have to do is like it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you'll never be disappointed. Yeah. So when did printmaking come into your story? Did you find it in art school? Were you exposed to it before that? And how did it kind of capture your imagination?
I would say college. I went to North Carolina Central University, which is a historically black college in Durham, North Carolina. And I would say there, but I would also say, because I just didn't know, like doing things in middle school and high school, we didn't do much printmaking in high school, but middle school, you know, we all did the thing where like our teacher, Kathy Williams, she gave us the white potato and you cut it in half, and then you carve something in there, you dip it in some egg tempera paint, and then you make stamps and you do things with shoestrings and stuff. But you don't know that's printmaking.
Right.
Like nobody told me that was printmaking. I just thought it was like, oh, we made stamps out of a potato and it was cool.
Yeah.
It was more so when I got into college and I had to take my first printmaking class. And I want to say like it was a convergence of 2 classes that made me really love printmaking. It was, at the time, I was taking printmaking 1 and I was taking African American art history. And so it literally was taking that class and then seeing the work of a Catlett and Charles White at this Hale Woodruff, and I'm like, I want to do this.
Yeah.
I love this. I fell in love with it. And printmaking to me, because drawing was always my first love. I tell everybody I know, I'm like, printmaking is drawing with a knife.
Uh-huh.
Same thing to me. Like printmaking is just drawing to me. It's just drawing with a different tool. And so that's why I fell in love with it. And because just like when you're drawing and you're mark making, in printmaking, your hand is all in it. Like every good mark, every bad mark, it's totally representational of your hand. And I remember like one of my friends was like, oh man, we got this CNC machine and you should like bring in one of your drawings and we'll rasterize it and we'll do the wood cut and the CNC thing. I'm like, I don't want to do that because then it's perfect.
Yeah.
My hand is no longer in it. Like my joy is the physicality and the redacting of the linoleum and like understanding how I feel when I'm making it. And I just loved it. Like, and I think I loved how frustrating it was. Because you can make one cut and ruin the whole damn thing, and you'd be like, God, I gotta start over. It was, I could get into a space where it was almost like outer body when I was carving. Like, I guess that was a very early version of these like satisfying videos my kids be watching people scooping ice cream or whatever.
Right, yeah.
I was having, my I guess, ASMR thing just like in the most manual way you could have it and just carving.
Yeah. I've heard that a lot, particularly from artists who do a lot of relief work. That the most favorite part of what they do is the carving. And I'm married to a printmaker who, in his undergrad, he did, like 6-foot woodcuts, and he would just, hours and hours and hours just like put headphones in and just disappear into the carving. Or I had Caledonia Curry on a few episodes ago, and she was saying that like the drawing is like just kind of preparing for the carving, which is where the real like joy and kind of meditative state comes from. So I always wonder if, there's some kind of through line for artists who were drawn to the carving process almost as a kind of escapism or getting into a flow state or a way to just have a meditation. And then on the other side of it, you've got a work of art.
I call it the hallelujah moment.
Yeah.
I call it when you can't hear anything, you kind of like necessarily like almost not even there. It's just your arm working. Mm-hmm. You can't make any bad cuts. You just got into this real zone. And, I always say like, and it sounds crazy, but I told my friend, I said, when I find that space, that's when I feel like I'm closest to God. Mm-hmm. Like that I'm doing exactly what I was put on earth to do.
Yeah. I had someone in my cohort in grad school. I did an MA in art history, so not in the making, but in the talking about it. And but she was studying like repetitive artistic practices as a form of devotion. And she, everything from like nuns and convents who would weave and weave and weave these incredible tapestries, to carvers and sculptors. And I think that there's really something there because when you get into those flow states, it's like the ego disappears. And that is, I think, when human beings are the closest to their God, is because it's like, it's not the like that selfish narrative of like, this is what I look like, this is what I need to do. It's just like, I am in existence and I am creating something, and it's truly transcendent moments. And I think that either people get it or they don't, and I try to explain it to them. But I've definitely had it, and I've known people who do, and it's beautiful. It's a little touch of the divine in our real life. Yeah.
I really believe in that because I've always had that sense when I was making things and doing those repetitive things. I mean, I guess I would say it's similar to, I don't do it, but it's similar to people I know who run and they get that runner's high.
Right, yeah.
It's like, because you're just like so much wrapped up in your passion at that moment. And that's what I was saying in the very beginning, where it's like, that's my joy. Like, what's on the wall is not my joy. The joy is in the carving. It's in the making. It's because immediately when I'm done, I want to move on to the next thing so I can get back to that feeling.
Yeah.
That's why I go, but I'm not necessarily ever like overjoyed about shows and openings. Because this is for you. Like, I already seen all of this. I made it. Like, I was like at the highest of the high when I made it. Like, I just want you to enjoy it. Yeah.
It's so funny, but I can completely see that, is that it's, like, I love that. Like, you're like, I've already seen all this. I'm there for it. And but it's part of the artist's life is showing up at your own openings and, hobnobbing and all of that. It's part of it. Although, less so in the last 2 years, of course.
Because I just know, like, that's part of my That's part of my bargain with the gallery. That's the price of doing it. It's like, I know I can only help them if I show up and do what I'm supposed to do. It's never my favorite thing because you're exhausted at the end of it because you're like, man, I've answered the same question 55 times.
Right.
But it's like, you kind of like owe it to the gallery and the galleries. But also what I do enjoy about it is educating people.
Yeah.
That's what I enjoy about it. Not necessarily trying to sell anything, just educating people about why it's important and why they should care. And not necessarily care about my work, but just care about art in general.
Yeah, yeah. And do you find that you get a lot of opportunities to do that? I mean, do people come to the openings at your galleries with a kind of openness to be educated?
Yeah.
That's great.
I'm standing in a corner a lot of times in the back with like a line of people in front of me. And I'm like, man, I got like 12 people in front of me, like waiting with a question. And so you're kind of just like educating, to the best of your ability. It's almost like speed dating. It's like, how can I give everybody a little bit of what they need and what they want? And then sometimes there's a person or, a couple or whoever who want to buy something, but they just want to hear your input on it.
Right. Like they want to have that moment with the artist before they commit to buying. Yeah, I know those ones. Yeah.
Times of my life, it was like they're on the fence and literally what's going to tip over is your moment with them and telling them about what it means. Mm-hmm. And so sometimes it's that, but mostly it is education. People want to know how you did it. It's the same thing as when the musician cuts the woman in half in the box. It's like, well, how did he do that?
Yeah.
Like, I want to know. So people want to know. They want to know, like, what you were doing, and you kind of, I think having that moment with the artist is your chance, like the Wizard of Oz, to pull the curtain back a little bit. Mm-hmm. Say, this is how I did it. And especially with printmaking, because a lot of times people don't really understand what they're looking at, like, especially with relief printmaking. And I'm like, I end up usually explaining it to them, like, this is a gigantic stamp. Somebody puts like paid and stamps on a piece of paper. It's almost the exact same thing. I'm like, that's just one that's been commercially made. Like, this is me carving out something and then stamping it into a piece of paper.
Yeah. 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 I think that's one of, if they haven't done the potato stamp in high school, that's the best one. That's when I would have to describe it, I'd be like, do you remember doing potatoes in high school? Like, I do bring it back to that because a lot of people did. I mean, that's a very iconic high school class experience. And then I'm like, so, times that by a few 100,000 and that's, what you're seeing today. Yeah.
This is just a kid who kept using the potato stamp.
Yeah, exactly. Couldn't get enough of it. Well, speaking of questions that I know you've answered over and over and over again, but I do hope you don't mind answering one more time.
Ask me anything.
Yeah, it's the story of the pigeons, because I do think that moment when you kind of felt that connection with them, which I've heard you tell in many different interviews, but I hope you don't mind telling it one more time because I think it is a really poignant and significant story, and of course they are such a reoccurring theme in your work.
Yeah, I just kind of started out like my practice is very research based. Like, anybody who follows me or knows me personally knows my house is like covered in books. Mm-hmm. Like, I love the research things. And I wanted to do a book about conditioning like Black men in America and trying to figure out how to speak to it in a different way. And I did all this reading and this research and I was like, yeah, it's still not there. It's got to be something that I need to like approach. I wanted to figure out how to develop a different visual vocabulary to speak about conditioning. And it really was like making a studio visit with one of my friends, another Detroit artist, Tiff Massey. And she was like, you got to just find an everyday thing and try to explain it through that lens. And I kept thinking about it. Nothing was coming to me, and was walking to work one day on the sidewalk, and there was a span, like a gaggle of pigeons who were eating. And I was trying to get through them because there was only way to get around them was like to literally walk in the street downtown, which was not a good idea either. And and I'm a big guy, I'm like 6'2", 6'3", like close to 300 pounds. So I'm like walking through the middle of the pigeons and they wasn't moving, and I had to kind of swipe at them with my foot. And they didn't fly away. They just kind of like moved over a little bit. And I was like, man, I hate pigeons. They're like always in the way and bothersome. And I was like, oh my God. I was like, some people probably hate Black men the same way. And so then it became me just like trying to do research and becoming what I call like a bootleg ornithologist, like trying to learn good about pigeons and their behavior. And then that's when I started coming across all of these kind of factoids about, wow, pigeons are native to America. I would have never known that because it's literally probably the most common bird that anybody sees.
Totally, yeah.
You're like, so the bird I see the most is not native to here. And they were brought over in the 1600s around the same time that transatlantic slavery commenced. And, they're pretty much like native to like parts of Europe and Africa and some parts of Asia. And they came over here, I guess, and in some ways in servitude, as a cheap meat, some, came as messengers over time. And then the more research I started doing, I was like, wow, a pigeon within like a month or so of its birth, wherever it's at, it imprints as that is home to it. Mm-hmm. And it never wants to leave home. Like a pigeon would almost die trying to get back home. And you think about, people coming over on a boat, from Africa, as part of slavery or chattel. And it's like, you have to adapt almost immediately. Like, this is now where I'm at. This is my environment. And this is imprinted on me. And it's that same type of conditioning where it's like, even in that worst space, you almost can't even imagine how to leave or how to get out because it's now impressed upon you. And, just thinking about all of those different things and just, I think sometimes people look at like blackness as this monolith and it's really like a spectrum. Mm-hmm. Kind of the way you look at a pigeon, like you just see a gray pigeon. But if you ever get real close to it, you see the purples and the blues and the greens and like this iridescence in the feathers. Like you see the beauty of it. And sometimes you can't really have a relationship with something from far away. You have to have a tangible connection to it. And I think a lot of times in America, there's no tangible connection to Black people or people of color, because it's been viewed with a fixed lens. And this is what I know. And this is what I know because this is what my mother told me. And this is what their dad told them. And so you never have a genuine connection, and you never develop any type of empathy that tends to develop between humans in general. And so just thinking about those things and then going further and thinking about, trap shooting or skeet shooting and how they were using these birds for like target practice. And, they almost did it to the pigeon's extinction. And that's when they came with clay pigeons they used for target practice. And it's like, imagine being a bird who's put in this trap, and that's what they call it, a trap, because it's like a little cage and the door is lifted and you're like, oh my God, I'm out. As soon as you fly out, you don't realize there's a guy with a gun standing on the left of you that's tracking you in the air to kill you as a sport, and not ever thinking about your value as a living thing. And so some of my latest work has been, working with me making my own clay pigeons with the faces of Black men. And most of them have been broken and scattered throughout galleries. And just talking about, being a person that's being able to evade and get through these obstacles. Even in the sport, they call a missed shot a bird away. Just thinking how few actually get away and how many are actually broken. That installation was called I Hit More Than I Missed.
Right, yeah.
There was only 3 pigeons on the wall, and there were dozens and dozens of them broken everywhere. And so a lot of times I think growing up, especially people of color, it's like I felt like I was that person that got away and got out of that neighborhood because I was in a neighborhood that was filled with redlining and food deserts and all those different things that tend to trap people who are existing below the poverty line. And art kind of was my avenue to get away. But, doing the work is always, my thing about doing that work. I always wanted to make it an educational thing where when you see it, it's always about, what role do you play in this system? Are you helping somebody escape, or are you putting somebody in a cage? And wanting to like press upon people, like, it's not about necessarily you ever buying a piece of work or a bird or a drawing. It's about from this point on, after seeing that, where are you going to put your line in the sand? And are you going to make more of an effort to get to know people as humans? It's also one of those things that me and my friends talk about in nature, and the word is escaping me, but it's when you see an animal with a certain color, like a red or a yellow, or you see a red frog. It's called a poem. It's like the color is to give the sense of danger to a predator. Because it's like, oh, I know I should leave that frog alone because it's not green. Something is inherently going on. And I think a lot of times, like just since 1619, like our skin has been used as a sense of apposematism where it's been labeled as danger.
Right.
And, I would always tell one of my old coworkers, she would say, well, you've accomplished these things and you've won Emmys and you've done all this and done all that. And I was like, nobody knows that when they see me.
Yeah.
My skin greets them well before my resume. They see giant black guy walking towards them. And I've definitely had all those experiences where people are like cowered in the corner in the elevator, or they cross the street, they see you coming, and I'm like, I don't want you. I'm the last thing you should be worried about. Mm-hmm. I'm just going to the store.
Yeah.
And it's just, making work that kind of speaks to that. And I wanted to use the pigeon because sometimes when you make work that has a heavy context to it like that, people don't ever want to look at it. They don't want to confront it. And so the pigeon in some ways almost made it whimsical. People came in when I first started doing it, they were looking at them like, oh, this is like some Harry Potter, like Phoenix Griffin type thing. Know what it was about.
Yeah.
And so they really leaned into it. And when they leaned into it, it gave me a chance to really hit them with the context of it. And then it became heavy. But part of it is you got to get people in the room to reckon with it. And so I was like really happy to find a narrative that like, gave some sense of whimsical, but also still had the heaviness. I was able to make, as I tell people, a sharp butter knife. And so that was kind of how it started, and that was the journey. And I'm still working, in that narrative of what I call the American unearthology, a lot more now installation based and mixed media.
Yeah, because I think I saw a footage of you doing the clay pigeon installation where you're actually breaking the plates yourself in the gallery with them hanging on the wall, and it's just the sound of the shattering plates is just like really effective, and like it's a really powerful piece. Yeah.
Gunshots, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
So you saw it, but the first one I broke, it kind of scared me because I didn't know it was going to sound like that.
Yeah.
And I kind of back up a little bit like, ooh. And it wasn't, people were like, was that cathartic? I'm like, not really. It was kind of triggering.
Yeah.
I thought it might be cathartic, but it was like more triggering to break them because you're hearing the sounds, but you're also seeing all the broken faces, and it's making you think about all the broken people that who've been broken, a lot of them unjustly through the system. And so it definitely was not therapeutic as I thought it might be.
Yeah. And I think that's part of the artistic process, is that you can have your plans, but you really don't know what you're going to get out of it as an individual and as a person until you're actually in the weeds of doing or making, and it's still an exploration and something that you can't control. Yeah. So who are the subjects of your pieces? You do a lot of just, really beautiful portraiture mixed with these images. Are they friends? Are they family? And how do you go about finding and drawing the people in your work?
Some of them are friends. Some of them are people I've just photographed in the streets. And then some of them are collages of police mugshots. And it's like I've collaged them because I wanted to make, a statement using the mugshots, but I also didn't want to like single one person out.
Right. Yeah.
And but a lot of them are my friends, because some of the first thoughts I had about this was just people I knew. And it was, kind of started with a weird conversation with a friend of mine one time. And I came over to his house and we were talking, and he's like, what are you about to do? I was like, about to go get some dinner at P.F. Chang's. And I was like, you want to? And he was like, sure. And we were driving to P.F. Chang's, but it's outside of Detroit. It's in Livonia, in a suburb. And we got like about 90% of the way. And he was like, I never been out here. Where are we at? And I'm like, dude, you've been living in the city for like 35 years. You never been out here. And then it just made me start to think about that conditioning where you're like, and not to be in places that you're quote unquote not welcomed, and it's like, and I was telling him like, man, you need to just get in your car and go explore. And I'm like, there's no such thing as a place you don't belong. You belong just because you're a human. But we've put so many labels on things in America, and having this kind of invisible caste system, even though it's very visible, but people never want to acknowledge it. I was posting something the other day just because it was, it was like a very poignant video to the point I'm always making. And it was like Mitch McConnell was speaking, and he was like, African-American voters are voting, in a much larger percentage than Americans. And I'm like, but we were
Yeah. I'm sorry. What, Mitch?
yeah. Well, it was like those are those things, like these little conditioning things. Like you're like basically not even seeing African Americans as Americans. Like I feel like almost anything that's not white is hyphenated.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of like you're making work to battle those things. And it, and that's kind of where it came from. It's just that little trip with my friend and being like, man, you never went to this restaurant because you felt like you didn't belong out here. And I'm like, if you go on with that train of thought, then you won't feel like you belong anywhere. Like one of the quotes I always talk about in some of my reading is Carter G. Woodson wrote this book called The Miseducation of the Negro. And his whole thing was, if you send a person through the back door long enough, they'll build their own back door. They won't ever know to not do it. Because if you can control their mind, you can control their actions. And that's what he talks about. And so a lot of what I'm doing, is talking about that trapping of, someone's mindset.
Yeah. Yeah. And listening to you talk about all of it, it makes me think about, that all that dialogue about, that like the default space in the U.S. is a white space. And then we carve out other spaces for African Americans and Asian Americans and queer Americans. And then, it's these little islands. And it really is speaks to what you're saying about, the pigeons kind of implanting or imprinting on where they were born. And then also, how the art world is such like dominantly a white space, art galleries and museums. You look at boards and you look at directors, and of course it's changing as it should. But, talking about accessibility as we were kind of at the top of the hour, I think that's really significant as well, is just because an art gallery is free and open to the public 7 days a week does not mean that every human thinks that it's for them. And that's not a coincidence. It's not a mistake. That's the societal programming going back hundreds of years about, who is luxury for, because art is seen as a luxury, and who is, like aesthetic pleasure for, who is that for? And so, just kind of by going into these spaces and putting your work on the walls, I mean, that's counter to that narrative as well.
I was having a conversation yesterday with an art manager, and we were talking, and I was telling him about like what you were just saying. Some of these boards are changing. What museums are collecting is different in some spaces, not all. But I was telling him, like, what if George Floyd didn't get murdered? Would they be buying this work? Because I can pinpoint that to like the very turn when people started posting black squares on Instagram and trying to change things. But it shouldn't take something like that. And people are like, oh, black art is such on trend. I'm like, that's because most spaces, institutional spaces, museums, like 2% of their collection is that.
Yeah.
So they're trying to catch up.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, I know at some point when they feel like we've spent enough to absolve guilt or whatever, it'll go back to what it was. Because just like they're hiring all these people, I've also seen a huge uptick in black curators leaving spaces and institutions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. It's and I think because, I don't know, I mean, I never want to like say I know what someone's motivations are for that sort of thing. But I was talking to someone who went down to Miami for Art Week and, at a dinner, and some curator was there saying, it's just, you can just tell it's like such a trend. It's like you go into these fairs and it's just like every single work is by a black artist. And I said, yeah. And forever, every single work was by a white artist. And nobody thought that was weird,
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, like, I'm sorry. Like,
That's what makes America the complex, beautiful place that it is. Like, because there's such different sides.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's like you said, like I remember looking at fairs like years ago, and you could like literally you look at the entire fair roster and you're like, man, there's like maybe 4 women artists and maybe 2 of color.
Mm-hmm.
Entire roster that's fair. And no one thought that, I think people were just like, well, we met our quota.
Yeah.
We're good.
Yeah.
And so like, let's just have good art. How about that?
Yeah, absolutely.
The people who are making significant art that's questioning things and, captivating minds and challenging the status quo. How about everybody who's doing that type of work just get their chance? Mm-hmm. There's nothing with that.
Yeah. Yeah. And, I think it's like everything, it's going to be a mix and it's going to be complicated. And, there are going to be people who I think have a very genuine kind of awakening and realizing that I've been ignoring art done by non-white artists, and that will be a really genuine change in the way that they curate, right? The gatekeepers is who I'm sort of speaking of like who goes in the shows, who goes to the fairs, who goes in the catalogs, who gets collected, the people who are making those decisions. I'm sure some of them, it's like, yeah, it's a very genuine realization of overlooking just incredible talent to the detriment of their collections as well. Even if they do it for purely selfish reasons, like you're going to have a better collection if you're collecting from more diverse range of people. But I'm sure there are people who are doing it because they, just don't want to get in trouble. And they're like, oh, well, if I don't start this, someone will not like me, or I won't get the funding that I want. But hopefully there'll be more of the former than the latter, and we will see a change. But I think only time will tell.
I tell people all the time here, and I'm like, don't ask me to speak about art during Black History Month. Like, I'm the same all year round. Like, I get that all the time. February comes, the phone starts ringing.
Really?
Like, I can actually talk about printmaking and drawing other here.
That's awful.
And I kind of stopped doing it because over years, I was like, oh, this is a thing. Mm-hmm. Like, this is what we're going to do for Black History Month in these institutions and Gap. I'm like, I'm going to be the same artist no matter what. So I should be able to speak all through the year whenever you have all types of programming.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But it's a huge turn, to get people to think differently. I used to have a boss who would always tell me it's like trying to turn a cruise ship on a dime. Mm-hmm. You got to make a gigantic circle to really turn it. And so it's going to take a lot of time and a lot of the gatekeepers to say, we were wrong and this is how we should be collecting. This is how we should be showing. This is how we should be writing. And like you said, put in these catalogs, because that's one of the major things that I always think about now. It's like, you want to get in these catalogs. Every exhibit I've done in the last couple of years, I'm like, I made the gallery make a catalog because I'm like, this way there's provenance. Like you can't erase anything I did. There's a tangible thing floating around that talks about this work. And that's important.
Yeah, you are being, you're in the archive then. Like the physicality of catalogs, I think, I completely agree, is hugely important, because digital technology is going to change and adapt and evolve. And, the photos that you're taking now, like, who knows if they'll be able to be played on devices in 50 years. That's going to evolve. But a printed catalog, particularly if you can get a high number of them produced, it's like printmaking. We've got so many prints from history because they're physical and because they were multiples, so they had a chance of surviving. So, we've got an incredible amount of Ulbrichter's woodcuts over his paintings, because that's just like survival by multiplicity. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. I think in the bit of the time we've got left, I'd love for you to talk to your experience of having a studio in your own house and making work, while being an active full-time dad as well. And how, we said before we jumped on that, you've got work in the Smithsonian that you made on your sofa. And I just love that about your practice, because you have this just incredible draftsmanship, this incredible precision and beauty in the images that you make. And they're so almost sort of classical in their rendering that I think maybe some people might imagine that, you're in a light-filled studio overlooking the water or something. But you're at home and you're with your family while you do it.
Yeah, I think people always think that, they're just like, because they're like almost, even though they're not in that same approach, but they're almost like these Western classical type of drawings. Mm-hmm. People just think I got like some 3,000 square foot light field, studio. And I'm like, no, I'm working on a couch and the paper is taped to gator board and I'm drawing on my lap and I'm turning the paper and the board around. And so over the years, I've gotten really adept at drawing upside down and like drawing back, just drawing all types of different ways. But I think part of it is, as we spoke about before, and I think we might have been offline, but having 2 sons and having one with special needs is on the spectrum. I kind of need to be home. It was one of those things where it was like, you got a kid that's 14 and still in, diapers, and you still feeding them. You can't really just go like, I'm going to go off to the studio for 10 hours.
Yeah.
And so over time, I've always just made work on my couch. I mean, it wasn't until the last year that I actually put a drafting table in the living room. I was just always working on the couch. And now I've kind of converted it fully to a studio where it's just a few bookshelves full of a bunch of books on art and different things that I enjoy and artists I enjoy. A ton of toys, because I collect toys and I love toys, and that probably goes all the way back to my love for wrestling and drawing. It's not so much the toy or who it's more like the design behind it. Like somebody drew this, somebody figured out the colors, somebody, everything is art. That's how I kind of approach. Yeah. I'm looking at this fish tank in my room now, and I'm like, somebody drew that fish tank before it was a fish tank. Mm-hmm. And designed it. And so that's kind of how I look at it. But, one of the other pluses about working like that, even though it can be crippling and sometimes working at home, is like I could work all night and just get up and go to bed.
Right. Yeah.
Like I get up from some building far away from my house and drive home. Sometimes I'm in there. Like last night, it was like 4:30 in the morning. I was like, you know what? It's time to stop painting. And I just got up and I went in the other room and went to sleep.
Yeah.
And I'm not putting anybody in danger because I'm not driving home sleepy, in the middle of the night, and, very cold, snowy weather in Detroit. And it also just allows me, to keep an eye on my sons. And I think I'm always inspired by them in little ways. I think some of my drawing practice is inspired by having a son on the spectrum, because he's taught me over the years to be like the most patient person. Mm-hmm. Sometimes drawing and printmaking is all about patience. Carving is all about patience and making the right cuts and like being very meticulous in how you execute these things. And a lot of my friends who are painters, they always tell me, I don't know how you're drawing like that, because I don't have the patience to do that, because you really can't speed up a pencil. Now you could take a wide brush and like fill in a background really quick with paint, but you can't do that with a pencil. It's like you really have to nurture it. And I think some of that is a byproduct of having to nurture my son and just really patient. I mean, right before I got on with you, I was in the store and this lady was like, you've been waiting for 40 minutes. Is everything okay? Like, and I was like, yeah, I'm just waiting on this chicken for my son. And she was like, you're like the most patient person. And I'm like, lady, waiting on chicken is like the least of my problem. like, what good is it going to do for me to be screaming and yelling at you who cooking chicken for my son to hurry up?
Yeah.
I just think you learn, especially when you get older, that, life requires grace. Relationships require grace. And you require grace to you should be required to give grace to yourself. Because there's times when I make drawings and make things that I don't love. And I have to be able to tell myself, it's okay. You're still, learning. That never ends. My 12-year-old is an amazing, artist for his age. He's better than I was at 12. And he always gets upset when he messes up a drawing and he balls it up. And he'll be like, I can't draw like you. And I said, I'm 44. I'm still balling up paper. Ball up paper every day. I was like, that's what's great about art, is you never know everything. You only get better. You only keep learning. It's one of the other things I love about being an artist. You never truly retire. You just make until you can't make anymore. And I love that. Like, I think about that all the time. Like, a lot of people are going to retire from something. I'm just going to keep doing it until I can't.
Yeah. I can't think of a more beautiful note to close our conversation on than that. Yeah. Very wise words about the patience that art making, and particularly drawing, and, drawing to the level that you do takes, and that artists are really lucky to be on a journey that there is not an end point. I think that's, really beautiful. So thank you so much, Rashaun, for joining me. Like I said, I've really wanted to chat with you for a while, and it really was just delightful and beautiful. And I really appreciate you letting me borrow an hour of your time.
Thank you. Thank you for even having me on your wish list. I had no idea. You never know who's looking at your work or whatever. And this was such an amazing conversation, a delightful hour. And I just appreciate you for even thinking of me.
If you like today's episode, we have a Patreon where you can help us keep the lights on and get bonus content. Things like Shop Talk Shorts with our editor, Timothy Pauschak, who digs deep on materials, processes, and techniques with our guests. And if you've listened this far, you might be that special kind of print friend who would leave a review for us on Apple Podcasts. It would mean the world to us if you did, and it really does help support the show. Join me again next week when my guest will be Jeroen Schmeitz, founder of The Jaunt, a project that combines our favorite things, travel and printmaking. The Jaunt sends artists on short trips somewhere around the world that they have never been before, and then publishes an edition based on their experiences. We'll talk about how skateboarding and graffiti brought Jeroen into the world of art, the logistical joys and pains of taking on such a project, and what happens to you when a global pandemic strikes and you've got an artist on a silent retreat in a Sri Lankan monastery. You won't want to miss it. This episode, like all episodes, was written and produced by me, Miranda Metcalf, with editing by Timothy Pauschak and music by Joshua Weber. I'll see you next week.